Interesting thing happened to this teacher one day in 1989 when I was strolling across the inner quad. A couple colleagues nabbed me. Tom Wasso, who was then the Dean of Undergraduate Studies, and my good friend and colleague, Tim Stanton, who's now the director of Haas Center, at the time he was the associate director. And they cornered me and asked, why don't you consider teaching a service learning course? And after great consideration, I turned to them and said, what? What the heck is a service learning course? Over the next 6 years, however, I would become very familiar with what service learning was all about, as I became one of those faculty members that Tim and Tom convinced me to engage in this type of experiment, curricular experiment. I didn't know in 1989 what a service learning course was. I mean, I could guess, but only after some consideration of what it might take to actually launch an experimental course with service-learning did I really come to appreciate the power of this type of curricular reform, not only in my classes, but I think by extension in classes throughout the university. It is in fact a curricular reform now that is reaching across American higher education and becoming institutionalized in our curricula. And it's only within about the last 10 years that's happened. Well, what I'd like to do in about the next 30 or 40 minutes is to discuss some definitions so that you have a little better idea of what service learning is. And there's one of my co-conspirators who just entered the room, Tim Stanton. Then I'd like to discuss the structure of the course that I initiated in 1990. And Michelle referred to it as Poverty and Homelessness in America. It still goes by that title. Subsequently, I'd like to talk about the prospects, the very good, beneficial things that can happen in a service learning course based on my experience, but also some of the downside, because you're dealing with some things that are unknowns and some issues that are going to arise in this type of curricular context that faculty simply will never experience or very rarely experience in most of the courses they teach at Stanford or elsewhere. Then I want to give voice to the students, because these are the prime movers in this course. These are the people that go through this experience of combining the service and the learning. I'm really kind of the moderator. I'm not the teacher per se, because I'm learning along with them. Every year I teach this course, I'm learning as much as I am teaching about the literature which I require them to read. But I want to read from their personal journals, because they are an incredibly powerful set of documents that speak to the importance of service learning curricula. And where it has a place, I think, in how we educate our students and how we prepare them to become citizens of the nation. And then lastly, I'll offer some suggestions on how anyone could go about developing a service learning course with some kind of essential ingredients, if you will, about embarking on this type of curricular reform or curricular innovation. Well, the term service learning per se is relatively recent in higher education. It's about 10 years old, probably not much more than that. But public service carried out by Americans in high institutions of higher education goes way back. Certainly it goes back to the late 19th century, early 20th century, when many educators, especially in the small liberal arts colleges of the East, expected students to go out and perform some sort of charity. Particular students, women students, was not expected for the most part of men, but women, this was seen to be a part of their liberal arts education. So there was a gendered perspective on who went out there to perhaps feed some of the children at the local orphanages, change diapers. Well, they probably weren't changing those, the disposable diapers 100 years ago, but change diapers, feed the kids, or go out and dish out a little bit of soup at Hull House or one of the immigrant settlement houses. So this tradition goes back at least 100 years, maybe longer. But service learning, I think, in our contemporary context is different. I think it means something substantially more, or it can mean substantially more than just sending our students out to perform some sort of charity. That's a part of it, but I don't think the most meaningful part of it. Well, service learning then, as the term implies, combines public service with academic learning. And broadly defined, I think that public service could include a huge variety of activities or efforts. to promote the public good. So underscore that, to promote the public good. I guess if you were a malevolent sort of person, it could also be public service to promote the public bad. But I know of no one, certainly at Stanford, that would be engaging in such activity. So it's really aimed at somehow contributing to the public good. Now, linking the service, or linking the learning to service to create the service-learning, translates into academic and scholarly activities that are combined with the service to promote the public good. And I would add that service learning, the way I try to practice it, and I think the way it should be practiced, is that there should be a dialectic between the service and the learning, so that they're not separated, they're not compartmentalized, but they're constantly bombarding one another. Students will do the reading, we send them to their field work, their internship. That internship should inform and come back into the classroom and inform the reading. The reading will be scrutinized. Going back out again, the students will have a more informed basis. So they're constantly interacting, I think, and I think that's how I've seen it emerge in my own class, and I think it to have most beneficial effect for the students involved. You know that a curricular reform has come of age when our colleagues in schools of education now start doing research on the topic. And this has been true about the last 10 years or so. More and more of our scholars are trying to now address what are the consequences, what are the influences, what is the impact of service learning on a variety of educational issues affecting our students in colleges and universities. And actually some of these colleagues doing this research have come up with some useful ways to categorize or conceptualize the type of service that students are engaging in, literally by the tens of thousands now. We're talking not about a small curricular reform in higher education. There are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of courses at every level of American higher education, including Stanford. We've made enormous progress in the last 6 or 7 years in the number of courses that we could call service learning courses, from just a couple back in 1990 to as many as 50 or 60 now that are regularly offered across many, many departments and schools. Well, how have some of these colleagues characterized this? And I think this is just useful for our understanding of how a service learning course of the type that we might develop here, certainly the type I've developed here at Stanford, fits into this categorization. First is charity, as someone has defined it. It can be public service that's linked to academic study, but it's going to be usually short-term. It's going to oftentimes be one-time service. It's not going to be systematic. It's not going to be in any way fundamental, I think, to the education of the student, but it could still be characterized as service. Let me give an example. If there was a course on American welfare policy, to give you an analogy here. Those students might be engaging the literature on and understanding welfare policies related to poor Americans. The charity type of service would not take into account serious engagement with the issues or the policies dealing with welfare. For example, the student could be sent out on a walkathon to raise funds for a local poverty program. Okay, so contributing something, but certainly not engaging the issues, and without making a value judgment, negative or positive, that at least there's some aspect of service. Or a student might go to a local church one afternoon or one day a week to serve food to folks who drop by for a free meal. That is charity. It could be related to this course on welfare policy, but is it going to have the type of impact that I think we would strive for? And I would argue no. Is it good? Yeah, we could probably say it contributes something to the public good. How much so would have to be argued. Now the next category that people have offered as a way to look at public service and service learning is what someone termed project. Now, as opposed to charity, project requires a substantial commitment of time and energy on a more regular basis. It can be short-term, but it can also be long-run. But more importantly, project type of service learning includes an objective or a desired goal. So there's something in which you're striving to reach some objective. There's some outcome that you want to attain. But importantly for us in the classroom, it's truly a serious engagement with the literature. So again, I'll take the idea, the example of a course on welfare policy. Well, before your student would go out into, let's say, an internship with some nonprofit organization or a government agency that's dealing with welfare reform, that person would absolutely have to have a solid foundation in that literature, to know the policies, to be familiar with a variety of interdisciplinary research that grounds that analysis, that understanding of then going out in that internship and understanding what's going on in an agency. So it has to be that dialectic that I was suggesting before. It has to be both. It has to be intensive. It has to be serious. It has to be a real commitment. And here's where I think most of our courses fit into this idea of project. And I'll explain how that evolved in my own course in just a few minutes. But there's another that someone else suggested, a type of category of public service, and referred to it as advocacy or social change, perhaps a better term. This type of service is yet another leap forward beyond project because it seeks to address and resolve the root issues, the core problems, and the social conditions, political conditions, whatever it might be. It requires an even more serious effort, a more long-time commitment, oftentimes a career. I've seen this happen as well. And it certainly requires an ever more intensive study of the literature which informs us about, again, looking at the issue of welfare policy, understanding both the historic and contemporary nature of public policy that informs welfare policy and welfare reform considerations in our contemporary society. Now, other folks have suggested that there's a continuum, that charity and project and social change is a continuum, but not necessarily so. I think that you can engage in charity and not make the leap to social project or project. You can engage in project and not make that big leap to social change. But in some cases, they are combined, they are interlinked, and we see students here all the time that are engaging in these types of activities that ultimately result in a career path that will take them in the direction of what we could call social change. All right, so that is kind of introduction to how we could understand the development of service learning courses at Stanford or anywhere else for that matter. And of course, there'd be other categories that I think that we could add that would be refinements of these three kind of major categories. But I think they're useful for us understanding the types of courses that evolve. Now, I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the course that I was cornered into teaching a few years ago, actually encouraged and supported, have been supported throughout the last 6 years in teaching this course. And that's been one of the principal factors for me continuing to develop this course and, in fact, taking it in new directions in recent years. But how did I decide to teach this course, you might be asking yourself? Michelle described my work as someone whose research and publication has been in Chicano studies, also some comparative race and ethnicity studies more recently. I don't teach poverty per se. I don't teach homelessness per se. That's a very recent academic subfield, by the way. Didn't exist prior to 1982 as a field of study. And it's still a relatively nascent field of academic endeavor. But what prompted me to develop a course called Poverty and Homelessness in America? Two things. Yes, I deal with ethnic and racial minority groups in American cities, primarily in the 20th century. By virtue of that academic enterprise, I study poor people, right? Impoverished people in American cities. So there is a definite academic link to my interests here. I don't do poverty studies per se. That's almost a discipline in itself anymore. It's an interdisciplinary area. But I'm not a scholar of American poverty. I look at groups that happen to be impoverished in American society, but I do not focus on poverty per se. But there's a connection. That academic connection is absolutely important because I'm familiar with that literature, right? Generally familiar with that literature on American poverty by virtue of the type of research that I do. But that in itself was not going to propel me to teach this course and wander into an unknown curricular area. I'd never taught a course like this. I had not really a very good idea of how you connect the service or what the service really means. But something else was pushing me in this direction to consider offering a course after Tim and Tom broke my arm to teach this course. In 1984, as a resident of Menlo Park, which is adjacent to the university here, and I've been a resident here ever since, of Menlo Park ever since I started at Stanford. In 1984, 85, I think it was, I read a local newspaper report that a homeless shelter, a shelter for homeless families, was being developed where? In Menlo Park. Aghast. How could this be? In suburban Menlo Park? A shelter for homeless people? Can't be. I inquired. Yes, indeed. Our poverty is suburban poverty. Our homelessness is suburban homelessness. And it's our people within our immediate community that are experiencing, in the 1980s, began to experience situations such that there was a downward economic spiral that led to homelessness. And it wasn't just unique in Menlo Park. Homelessness was moving out of urban America and into suburban America in a very substantial way. And Menlo Park, it was manifesting itself in Menlo Park. Well, I felt compelled, to tell you the truth, as a citizen of that town, that city, to do something, because I felt here was there a group of people who oftentimes beyond their fault were experiencing some traumatic things in their lives, and here was a shelter that was attempting to open it up in Menlo Park with, I should mention, enormous resistance from local city officials and residents of the community. So the odds were stacked against this organization to succeed and to provide some basic services to about 11 homeless families. So I became involved, more and more involved, but as a local citizen. It was not connected in any way to my position here at Stanford. But then in 1989, as I mentioned, I was asked to consider teaching a service learning course. And I asked Tim and Tom more about what they meant by service learning. It was pretty wide open. Maybe they didn't even know themselves what they were. Not true. They knew very well what they were trying to get a few faculty to experiment. And that's what it was. It was fundamentally an experiment. And it was okay with Tim and Tom. If we tried something, give it a shot. See if it worked for you as an instructor, for the students as people engaged in the public service connected to the academic learning. So for me, it was a one-shot deal in 1990, 91. I was going to try this. I'd never had an experience with it. I'd give it a shot. If it didn't succeed, well, it didn't succeed. If there was something that worked, that was pedagogically sound, that was fundamental to the education of our Stanford students, and something that redounded to my benefit as a teacher trying to employ a curricular reform in my own courses, then we'd stay with it. So, in other words, what prompted me to do is some academic interest here on the question of poor people, and then a responsibility as a citizen of this nation. Right? Those things came together in a powerful way for me to leap into this unknown territory. All right, let me just spend a few minutes talking about the structure of the course, so you know how this experiment unfolded. Clearly, we had to start from the academic foundation. I mean, what good Stanford professor would not ask his or her students to have that threshold of knowledge? And in this area, it really had to be interdisciplinary, because poverty studies and the emerging study of homelessness is really interdisciplinary. And it actually makes me as a historian take a back seat. The historians are not on the forefront of studies on homelessness, believe me. They are now beginning to write studies about historical dimensions of homelessness, but it's sociologists, it's policymakers, and social commentators that were providing the best material. So anthropological literature, sociological literature, psychological literature, educational research materials, and social commentary literature and history embedded in the curriculum. I decided, and I'm not sure quite why I decided this early on, there needed to be two components. And it had to be different from other courses that I taught or would think about teaching a new course. That is, typically in a small group course, and this was a small group course, you would have one weekly session of 2, maybe 3 hours. But I knew, given some experiences doing public service myself, that there had to be a different structure. Yes, we had to have them fundamentally grasp the literature and talk and engage the required literature. Tuesdays was for that. So I segmented Tuesday for that discussion of literature. But then we had to have Thursday, so it was a two-session class. Thursday was time for us to get back together again and to see how this experiment is unfolding for them and for me. That is, to bring that experience back from the shelters in which they were interns, have it reflected in group discussion, so the entire group is grappling with some of the issues, and I'll give you some insight into those issues when I read the student journals, because believe me, they're profound. But to have these two separate structures to allow that reflection, because the reflection in service learning is absolutely fundamental. You cannot engage service learning without allowing that opportunity for students to be able to reflect, engage, think about what they've experienced out there in the field as they bring it back to the classroom. And though I tried wholeheartedly to protect that required reading Tuesday section, they kept on trying to bring in the internship experience into the required reading. It was okay as long as they stayed with the required reading. But that dialectic that I mentioned earlier, it has a power of its own. And though I tried to structure two separate class sessions, they were continually bombarding one another. But the point is, you must give that student room and space to share with himself or herself and the group what's going on in this internship experience. For the vast majority of them, it's the first time they've ever stepped into a situation like this. And again, I'll read from the student journals and you'll get firsthand some of the impact of that experience. Then there's something else. Totally novice in this. I had to start structuring an internship experience for them out there. Now, I had some of the folks at the Haas Center who were helpful, but it really meant that I was going to have to go out there first and establish the contacts. Luckily, because of the work that I was doing at the Menlo Park Family Living Center, which is now called Haven Family House in Menlo Park, I did have connections with the Santa Clara agency that was the largest shelter providing agency in Santa Clara County. And the Emergency Housing Consortium of Santa Clara was then the agency in which the students in the class, and there are 14 to 15 of them each year, would go out to a variety of shelters. Everything from working with children, tutoring children in shelters for homeless families, to working with runaway and so-called throwaway teenagers in a drop-in shelter in San Jose, to working in a shelter primarily for homeless immigrant farm workers who find themselves without work and shelter during the winter months in South Santa Clara County, to an agency that opens up a warehouse for the homeless, open up the large armories, the National Guard armories, where 300 and 400 people come for a night's shelter. So, in other words, a variety of experiences in which students could elect to go to a particular shelter. And we've tried to keep the variety of those experiences for students alive each year. Students had to make a big commitment. If I was going to make a commitment to start this, they were going to darn right make a commitment to this. But it was extraordinary because early on I was asking them to make 8 to 10 hours to 12 hours commitment each week, at least twice a week. And that's a substantial commitment for Stanford students who are under a lot of stress, right? It is a lot of hours. I even asked more of them. I said, look, if you're going to be in this class, you've got to promise me that you're going to do this for 6 months. Because, again, it was actually a stroke of fortune. I don't know why I came up with this initially, but as I was thinking about it, can you really do an internship on the quarter system at Stanford? Where really, in the end, you'd have 7 or 8 weeks after orientation and some training to get into the internship. So I said, no, it's not going to work that way. It's simply going to be too difficult. Let's try it first 6 months. But if no students show up, because they know there's enormous commitment, then we'll back down and do something else. But There were many, many more students. And I interviewed 45 of them, because I interview every student that comes into the class. So it was not fun to turn away a whole bunch of students, and I have to continue to do that with this class. But I feel as well that it's important for me to know who's coming into that class. So in a 20 to 30 minute interview, I try to get a sense of what the student has done, if he or she has done work in public service before. About half of them have done some type of public service. Others, absolutely none. But do they have the interest? Are they willing to make the commitment to engage both the academic, the intellectual, and the service? Yes. Those are the students who end up in the class. Lastly, writing requirement. What do you do? How in the heck do you grade service? And I thought about this. You can't grade service. It's impossible to grade. Well, I shouldn't say it's impossible. Probably other people have thought more creatively than I about this. But in the end, I made it clear to students that I couldn't grade service. And I was going to ask them to do some writing requirements. First and foremost, an interim and final internship report in which they talk about their experiences related to the literature, the required reading. And then is a personal journal that I made them. You must commit to this personal journal. You must write in it every time you come back from the shelter, because it's not for me to read this journal. This journal is for you. It's to capture at that time your sentiments, your attitudes, your reflections, and it's going to be a very personal statement about the journey in which they are engaging for 5 to 6 months. Very important part of the exercise is that journal. But the first year in this experiment, I told the students, I'm not giving any grades. This is a non-conforming class. It's not one I've taught before. Therefore, I'm not going to give you grades. Revolution on my hands. No grades? Are you kidding? This is a Stanford course, right? Yes, it's a history course. And no grades? Well, I had to come up with a way then to really grade these students. I'd never had internship reports to grade, and I still don't give them a grade per se. So what did I have to do? What did I have to do? I had to fall back on my traditional way of teaching, at least in grading. I made them write a literature review essay. It's kind of a cop-out on my part, but I had to have some basis in which to judge their intellectual contributions to the class. So they write the traditional literature review based on the required readings, in addition to the reports and the journals. So at least it got me out of the rut of saying to them and facing their hostility of not giving grades. So I give grades now. I've learned. Lastly, just one other point. I tell the students up front, you're about to engage in a journey that is going to test you in many, many ways. It's going to raise profound ethical questions for you. It's going to raise some issues that you probably never encountered in your life, because you are engaging a sector of the American population as the most disadvantaged sector of our society, the poorest of the poor, people who can't find shelter day to day, night to night, who can't put food on the table for their young. So you know you're going to be in an intense situation, and you know you're going to have to grapple with a lot of things. I mean, that was clear that was going to happen up front, and it was even more than I anticipated as students actually went out there and started to perform the internships. Why do I keep on offering this class? It requires more time than any of my other classes. It's intense, both for the students and for me. It requires additional resources. So there's all kinds of things that suggest maybe faculty out there shouldn't even get into this. But let me tell you something. If you want to invigorate the classroom with an intensity that you probably will never experience in your teaching, if you can successfully make that connection between the learning and the service and bring them together, you have a dynamism that certainly in my 22 years of teaching at Stanford, I've not seen equaled outside of this class. So for me as a teacher and as a learner, I'm learning every time I teach this course. But it's a context in which the combination of service and learning works. It allows the students to grapple with the literature after they engage in the internship in a way that none of my other students engage the literature without having that service component. And it's not that I'm trying to provide service learning components in every one of my courses. I can't, quite frankly. But clearly this course is unique in the ability of students to engage the literature and use the literature as a basis then to really understand what's going on in the real world. And then through that experience of being in that world outside Stanford, bringing it back into the classroom and questioning oftentimes that literature by our social scientists. Typical example, gee, that social science policy stuff's really devoid of the human dimension. Or it can be that contesting the literature. What such and such author said about homeless people simply doesn't work when I'm out there working with those runaway teens. Or I talked with a fellow at the Armory last night, and he gave me his personal experience, and believe me, it doesn't conform to what Michael Katz or someone else was telling me about homelessness. So it's that dialectic that's really important. In other cases, that which they read is confirmed when they go out there in the internship, when they talk about, for example, the spiral of economic downward spiral when some type of trauma or a crisis happens in a family's life and they can't control it and they spin downward and they find themselves in the shelter. Well, poverty studies tell us a lot about that economic downturn. So it clearly brings a dimension of discussion, of engagement with the literature that makes teaching an absolute joy. Again, sometimes I sit back and the students run the course, and I'm merely the moderator. Yes, I try to steer them in the directions I think they need to, and especially when we talk about the required reading, but the level of engagement, the level of commitment that is inspired by the public service is really what drives the invigoration. They grapple with some incredibly perplexing issues, right? Some things that tug at the heartstrings, things that raise some profound questions about our society, disparities in our society. It makes them confront the literature in many respects on this score as well, but it makes them confront their role as citizens. Right? What are the things we want to do when we just don't want to fill the heads of our students in my discipline with history? Right? We want them to be educated, yes, in the traditional sense, liberal arts sense, but we want to really train them to be fully engaged citizens of the nation with perspectives, because these students are going to emerge, many of them, as leaders of our society, the next generation. Don't we want to provide an arena of their education that is broader than our traditional liberal arts education? And here's where I think public service learning becomes a very important tool. Benefits to the faculty member, you learn along with the students. I've already mentioned that. That's clear every time I teach this course. I'm learning more and more about individuals out there who find themselves homeless, about the structures of our society, about agencies and government and local charitable organizations that are trying to confront issues of poverty and homelessness, about the limitations of people like myself, scholars who try to engage these issues. You're really a teacher, but you're also being educated. And lastly, for me, as a teacher, it allows me to say there's something beyond my own personal contribution to the public good, because by extension, those students are performing a great deal of public good that is benefiting society. Even shape some career paths. A huge number of these students, through the experience of this class, go on to several things. Some are in public policy schools, or already through with public policy MA programs. Where are they going? Local organizations, nonprofit organizations, or local government agencies that deal with welfare policies, poverty, other things. Some are going to law school because they really want to change the world. Whether law school education will do that, it may be entree to public policy penetration or consideration. Others actually have gone out, many of them, and become regular staff members for X number of years in the shelter agencies in which they were interns, or to other agencies that are providing shelter for people in the Bay Area. So there's tremendous good, both for the students, for the larger society, and for the faculty member. But it's not all rosy. There's some downside to this. One thing, think of the faculty member. We're not prepared to do this. We're not taught in graduate school how to engage in service learning curriculum. In fact, in graduate school, I don't think I was prepared to do anything as a teacher. That's probably why I wasn't very good to begin with. So we're having to learn along with the students. Now, there are many more of us now. There are good 40 or 50 of us that have engaged service learning. So we're learning together, and we're sharing things together. But we're ill-prepared. And I think it's going to make most faculty think maybe a second, twice, third time about whether they should engage this. But I think clearly the benefits outweigh the downside. Because we can make the classroom that much more exciting, not only for our students, but for us. Service learning, downside, requires more time and energy. There's no question, both from the students and from the faculty member. You know you're going to have to put more time into helping structure the internships outside our community, in the surrounding communities. You know it's going to take more time than structuring the regular syllabus for our courses. Allocating additional class time for that reflection part of the needed part of the curriculum, in which you integrate that reflection into your classroom setting. So more time. Time is precious. We're all stretched. We all have multiple responsibilities. Can we actually do this? It's a big question, I think, an important question. Again, I'll return to that bottom line, though. The benefits outweigh the problems. But there are other problems. What happens when the internships go belly up? That an internship supervisor simply is not giving the time to that student that in which that supervisor said, sure, I'll be glad to take on one of your students, but when it comes to day-to-day struggle running an agency, that person simply doesn't give the time. And you've got to pull the student back, change the internship experience for her. I should say her. Interesting, this is an aside. About 90% of the students in my class are women. Have been, continue to be. Now, the simple answer to that is that women are just far more insightful, engaging, provocative, smarter than the men. But no, I really think there's a gender perspective to this, simply because the nature of the commitment, the willingness to engage something, it's new, it's different, it's non-mainstream, you have to be more daring, and clearly women at Stanford, at least with respect to my class, are willing to do that. The men, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, men have not been attracted to this class. But that's fine with me, because I have some incredible people that I've worked with, and if they're women, terrific. That's more and more. Other problems. What happens when the student comes back to you and says, I can't take it anymore? I'm working with this kid, and today the Child Protective Services came in and took the family. This happens every quarter. Child Protective Services came in and took the kids, and they've told us that the kids are going to be taken apart and family disbanded, and the kids put in separate shelters or separate homes, foster homes. I can't take this anymore. It's just too hard for me. Yes, we've had a number of cases where students will come back, and we have to talk this out within the context of that Thursday session. But those are the types of intense ethical issues which students will engage that make them question themselves whether they can do this, right? Are they really up to this? Can they really perform this type of service? They don't have a whole lot of training, and in a way we just kind of push them in there with a little bit of training and orientation. But those are difficult questions, because then as a faculty member, I have to raise in my own mind, am I, by structuring this internship for this particular student, doing more harm out there than good, right? That's an issue you have to continue to deal with. Am I, as the person responsible for the course, ultimately doing beneficial things out there, or might we be exacerbating some problems? Well, the answer is clear for me every time I come back. There's no question. The good, the beneficial things that these students are doing are far surpass things the difficult things we have to grapple with sometimes. But they're real. But that, of course, that's going to be you have to understand, and if anyone's considering service learning course, you have to put it in the context of the internships and the people that my students are interacting with now. This is truly an intense situation because most people have never stepped foot in a homeless shelter, and so it is traumatic to deal with a population as disadvantaged as they are engaging. So it's not to scare people away. It could be a variety of other type of public service projects that would not entail the type of intensity and agonizing ethical questions that come up routinely in this class. So please put that in perspective. Well, how about the students? This is what it's really all about, right? This is what keeps me going because these students are amazing. They are remarkable young scholars, and they're remarkable young citizens that are emerging as adults who are going to go out there, and many of them will change the world in their own little ways. And I think what gives me hope and what gives me inspiration to continue offering this course on a regular basis is that this is a training ground for them. They're scholars who are familiar with the literature, and they know the importance of the research, the social scientific and other type of research, to bring to bear on a policy issue or a social condition, and yet they're the citizens who are engaging full force, providing some type of service, right? And they've combined it. And that's going to stay with them because they see the power of this dialectical relationship between the required reading or the literature and the service. But it's not easy going when they start out there. They often question their own abilities. They don't feel comfortable sometimes, oftentimes early on. They raise questions for themselves. Well, are they really performing any service? Let me give you a few examples of how this emerges early on in the student experience. So one student said, "Who am I to step into people's lives and make a difference anyway? Why am I doing this? What will the people I meet think of me, having seen so many people come and go in their lives with the goal of making their situations better? As much as I try, these questions seem impossible to answer. Instead, I have countered them with a cop-out. Isn't it better that I do something rather than just sit and let things continue to be as they are?" Which I feel is not right. Ugh, she says. I don't know the answer or if one even exists. This is one of the many things which brought me to this class looking for answers, hoping to link my education to service with work on issues of poverty and hopelessness. Homelessness. Hopefully this class will help me find the answers or at least come close. I don't know really what to expect or how things will work out. I'm really excited, but I'm also a little scared, she's being very honest here, of what I'll find out about myself and the issues and people I'll be challenged because of it. What I do know is that things aren't right the way they are, and they don't seem to be that way. And I can't just let this situation continue without doing something about it. I really can't. Okay, I'm ready now. She's getting, she's talking to herself now. Remember, this is the journal, so she's talking to herself. She's trying to get her confidence up. Okay, I'm ready now. I don't know what difference I'm going to make or how I could possibly measure it, but somehow I'm going to do it. She crosses her fingers in a quick prayer. She puts this in parentheses. I feel I can do it. Something's going to happen. So, she's embarking on a new journey, right? With a lot of trepidation, but with a lot of hope as well. There's another student. I guess I really don't know what to expect. Everything other people have said about the class and the internship experience implies it will be some type of big revelation or epiphany. But then I worry that I'm going to be building it up and ultimately be disappointed. I guess the point is that it will be a doubtlessly gradual experience no matter what the experience is. So I should just sit back and not worry about it. Not that I am meaning to imply passivity in any way, because that is exactly what I'm taking this class to get away from. Even just reading the home-based report, one of the required readings, on homelessness and learning about the millions of short-sighted policies which our society creates makes me angry at the people around me in the dorms. Do they realize that many of the people serving them food probably don't have health insurance? This is constant in the journal entries. They're questioning their own role in society, the people around them. Stanford University really is always embedded in this because the transition from shelter to Stanford is not an easy one for them. No, she says, they only have time to complain about how shitty and expensive the food is. And then their politics all revolve around some sense of entitlement that they are the chosen ones, and that all they have to do is blank around until 3 in the morning. This is probably for family hour showing, playing expensive games on their expensive computers. Not that I don't understand this in some way as well, because I think that one of the important things going on in this internship is the appreciation of the human condition, that people are affected by their environment, and therefore that the students here are in many ways as much a product of a screwed up society as those who are getting screwed by it. But it really makes me wonder what they attribute as their sense of purpose. Again, this is kind of this introspective and commentary that students often go through. A couple more on this theme. As I embark on my extraordinary journey into the real world of human poverty and homelessness, many thoughts spring to mind. How will I act toward people so different from myself? Are they so different from myself? I mean, she's posing the question, are they really different from me? What if they are just like you and me? Fear of knowing and facing our similarities may be the most frightening aspect of this whole experience. In readings thus far, I'm struck with the thought, could I become homeless too? According to the home-based report, many homeless people were once employed. So this is something they engage in, right? They're seeing people who break down all the stereotypes, or many of the stereotypes of the bag lady or the person begging for food or money on our streets. These are average Americans who happen to be in crisis. And this is often a part of their general response. Let me continue. The fact is disturbing, since many people like myself live paycheck to paycheck. I feel hesitant to begin my journey. Somehow I just know I'm going to see life in a different way after my experience. Will I be so disgusted with our country and its treatment of poor people that I will be too outraged to help? Or will I be moved to change the world, or just a piece of it? Perhaps I may even feel the problems are so overwhelming that that for any one individual to tackle and help is futile. I pray for God's strength and guidance in dealing with the challenges of this journey. One last one on this topic. I left with tons of little signs, pictures, and thank you cards. I was elated but completely exhausted. I felt like I had just finished running a marathon or something. But I felt so good about what we had done, it didn't matter how much energy it took. When we were walking to the car, some of the kids on their way to their unit asked us, which unit do you live in? We explained to them that we didn't live there, and one responded, oh, that's right, you live in a big house. That's when it really hit. It hit me hard, too, because I realized that everything had been so wonderful, I had almost forgotten what kinds of things these children are having to deal with in everyday part of their lives. I try to convince myself that being there was really good for them. It just doesn't seem like enough. At any rate, it was hard to leave. I can't wait for the next week. So that there's these issues that they're grappling with, which creates a lot of soul searching. I think what I'll do is give you a flavor of a few more, and then I see that I'm running out of time. And then if there are questions, I'll be glad to answer them. A few others, scattered themes throughout. I had previously been inside the kitchen serving dinner at mealtimes. This time, I was out in the hallway with everyone. It was a sobering scene for me. All sorts of families in various states of disarray waiting for their turn to go in for dinner. The family dynamics are less than pleasing. Lots of crying children and angry, impatient adults. It hurts to see. These hallways echo with the sounds of children crying. I saw Alonzo crying incredibly hard, but never before had seen him cry. But he was very upset about something. There simply is too much unhappiness in this place. Let me switch to a few examples of how they engage the literature, and how the literature informs their own internship experience. Even after taking a course on homelessness and working at THP, this is the one of the shelters in San Jose, for 3 months, I still grapple with what it means to be homeless. In Michael Harrington's The Uprooted, he writes that having a home is more than having a roof over one's head. He writes, it is the center of a web of human relationships. When the web is shredded, a person is homeless, even if he or she has an anonymous room somewhere. I agree that the guests at the THP are still homeless. They are the uprooted that society has ignored. Yes, they are not living on the streets, but it's not enough to squeeze them into municipal apartments with 2 or 3 other people whom they have never met. If the THP was a real home, the guests would have privacy and some more independence. At least they would be treated like adults. At THP, I have seen the precariousness of which Harrington writes. We have let homelessness in America slip away from being only a problem of shelter into a more difficult and chilling problem of isolation and ignorance. Harrington shows how many different kinds of people are affected: the working poor, the young, those who have been laid off from their jobs. Also, the mentally ill and those who are forced to turn to drugs and alcohol still suffer from being homeless. I have encountered every category at THP, and now I know how real it is. The residents are real people with nowhere else to go. I could go on and on. I mean, we've collected these journals entries, and we're probably going to do some type of publication with them because they deserve an audience far beyond my eyes. We have 120 pages of single-spaced comments from students that range all over the place. But I think if anyone's interested, they truly are documents that tell us the importance of when you can link service to learning, that it's going to have a truly profound impact on students' education, and I think on their ability to see their role as citizens in a nation after they graduate from this place and enter what they call the real world. So I think I'll end on that note and then see if there are any questions that you have that I'd be glad to answer for a few minutes. Thank you. Yes, it's a diverse group. I clearly want some people in there who've had experience because they serve as the peer mentors in some ways for the students. But I want to bring some students in who clearly want to engage this, right? Who have no experience whatsoever. They're motivated and they're eager, and you know they're going to benefit a tremendous amount from it, and they're going to give some substantial amount of energy back to the class. So I really look for a diverse group of students, all with the common factor is that are they ready to engage this type of work, right? Because they're informed very early on this is not a regular course. So, but it's a real mix of students. Yeah, good question. What informed my perspective and the way that the internships are structured, it's a concept of citizenship that is proactive, right? Proactive. It's not just citizenship in which you are a voting member. You're exercising your franchisement, that you're a voter, that you're a good citizen. This is engaging issues of social importance in the United States. And so citizenship for me makes that proactive, engaged citizenship makes that leap to really doing something. Again, under the rubric of project, with an outcome, right? With an objective, with a desired goal. Even if it's very modest, it's still a project. And that's where it requires the more proactivity of being citizen. You know, the question about whether I have enough in the literature, certainly there are things that speak to citizenship and service. But I don't have things that deal with ethics, and I probably should. And I think that came, that hit full force this year because I've had a variation on the course this year. And it raised some issues that I think I was ill-equipped to help the students with, and they didn't have the background. And so it may mean that I have to continue to alter, as I do every year, the reading list and ways to help students grapple with some of these ethical issues.